Welcome back to Post Projects and Project 818 SRX. I built a new fuel tank. It's not quite finished yet, and I took some pictures along the way, so I'm going to catch you up to speed as to where I'm at now. First of all, why am I building a new tank? Well, the factory tank sucks. Unfortunately, I don't have a good representation of the factory tank that I received because I've modified mine quite a bit. It's outside right now. It smells like gas. That's why it's not in here. Factory 5 has since changed the design of their tank. The big reason for me to modify the original one was I added this section here, whereas the Factory 5 one just came up square, but I needed the extra room for the seats. So this is where the two passengers, the passenger seat and the driver's seat, lean into it. And then it also had the corners were 45'd on either side, and they tapered down. So there's a lot of space not being used here. My understanding is the tank came from their 33 kit, which they just wanted to reuse that tank. Sure, cost effective, and they've since addressed that and built one custom to the 818, but it didn't really work for a number of reasons. It had a terrible baffle. It didn't have a baffle. It had like a little pickup bowl, which guys were getting a lot of fuel starvation, so they were having to add surge tanks, so there was no real internal baffling. And there was a lot of wasted space where you could have taken more fuel. It also would gurgle, like when you're trying to fill it up. It didn't vent very well. Lots of issues. So I'm addressing all of them now by switching to this tank. Now, I made mine out of aluminum. It's a little lighter, although if it was steel, it would probably be a little thinner. This is mostly all 1/8. So if you were steel, you'd be a little thinner, so I'm not sure the weight difference is a huge difference. When this tank is fully assembled with the pump, I will weigh it in comparison to the old tank. However, the old tank had some sound deadening material on it, which I'm not going to be able to fit on this one. A little bit. I'll put a little bit on the top, but I won't be able to fit it on the front. Okay, so what I've changed about this one, we've got the two internal baffles. Now, they are not trapdoor style baffles. They're just there to break up crazy fuel slosh. Because I'm going to have a surge tank mounted inside the tank, the Radium unit. We'll get into that later, but here's the gasket, and it's basically going to fit on like there, just like a fuel cell. Except the fill won't be coming from that. The fill will be right here, where I've got my pressure tester set up on there for testing for leaks. So I filled out these corners that were cut off on the old tank. They're also flat right to the top instead of tapered down like in the other tank. You can probably notice there's a hole in it. That actually goes right through to the other side. And that's for my new shifter, which I will get into in a little bit. But the shifter cables are now going, instead of where Factory 5 has them go around the front of the car, they're now going to go straight back. So it's going to be a much better shift feel. And the cables could have went over the top, but then they would have had to go over the top of the whole fuel cell setup. The cables would look uglier going that way. There would have been more force bend in them. It wouldn't have been as... They would have gotten in the way of my coils in the back. A whole lot of stuff would have had to move for me to go over the top. And it's just not the ideal route. You want the cables to go straight as possible. So if they went over the top, I'd have to remove the cables in order to pull the tank, if I ever need to pull the tank. So if they go through the tank, then I'd still have to remove the cables to remove the tank. Not that I plan to remove the tank anytime, for any reason, but if I had to, it's not that big a deal. I'll do the cables, pull them through, and then they get the best routing. I also added, you can see this section here lines up with the firewall, and inside it basically tucks in to the firewall, and that gives me an extra, I think it's a gallon, roughly 4 liters that adds. I think I did the math, it's going to be 65 liters, whatever that is in gallons, I'll put at the bottom, but I think that's a decent size. And then the surge tank will be in here, and not mounted in the engine bay, which is I didn't really want. I didn't want to have an externally mounted fuel pumps, which are loud. The rotary is loud itself, but I hate it when a car is just sitting there idling and all you can hear is a loud fuel pump. So if it's submerged in the tank, it's always going to be quieter. And then it's less fuel connections. So what I'm doing right now is, I've already done this, but I want to show you guys. So I'm going to test for leaks. And a long time ago I used to do a lot of aluminum work. It's been like 5 years, so I'm a little rusty. There are some beauty welds on here, and there's also some kind of mediocre welds. But at the end of the day, they just need to be sound and hold. Before I put the top on it, I was especially interested in where this goes through, if there was going to be any leaks. So I did what we often do in my line of work, is like a diesel test or a WD-40, where you spray it on the one side, and if there's the smallest little crack, it's like a penetrant test. If there's a little crack or a pinhole or something, you'll end up getting that diesel or WD-40 on the inside. And I got none. So there's no leaks, right? Now, when pressure testing it, that's a different story. And pressure testing it, I did actually find a leak in, not in the front, but actually in the back, and it's a real pain in the ass to get in there and fix, but I did fix it. Right now I've still got a couple of little ones, and I'm going to show you how I look for them. And it's a little bit overkill, because if you're getting like a little tiny leak with pressure, I'm probably running about 5 psi of air pressure, it's not going to really leak fuel. And if fuel did manage to seep through it, it would just evaporate. But I have the means to check. If there's a little default, I'm going to fix it. And there's also the chance that if it's lower on the tank, it's going to constantly seep and evaporate, and then you're going to get that fuel smell in the garage, which I don't want. You always want to build up your pressure slowly. Start at 1-2 psi. I went to about 5, which is plenty for this. Set on the regulator. Never hook it up with your full shop air. And always wear safety glasses and hearing protection. So now I've already checked it, so I know I have one leak, and it is right here. So if I wipe that away, you can see it's at the end of my weld here. I actually filled the leak right here, but there's a little crater left at the end of my weld that I didn't fill, and it's leaking. Now, would fuel ever leak through there? Probably not. But for the time it'll take to fill. Now, you can just spray, and some leaks you'll always catch them like that. However, some smaller leaks you won't catch like that, and you'll actually have to, if you take a soapy brush like this and just go along, they'll be a lot more apparent. And then you're also taking your time, and you're actually checking each section a lot more thoroughly and looking at it, as opposed to just standing back and spraying everything and then looking around after. Oh yeah, okay, one leak here, bubbles, but there could be a fine leak here that just not enough soapy water got on it to really start the bubble process. So before I fix that, I'm gonna go ahead and test fit the tank, because there might be some edges that I need to grind down, in which case I'd want to soap check them. And also I'm going to do my mounting brackets right there and there, 4 of those. So I want to weld them on. I'm going to weld them all the way around complete, and then I'm going to soap test those. And I want to do all that soap testing before I cut out my hole, so I don't have to do a soap check test with the fuel pumps in there. So this right here is why you always test fit before welding something out completely. So these bottom tabs that I have for bolting it down, because I have the piece that goes inside the frame, I can't actually install it now. So if I had welded those out, I would have had to cut them off, because I'm going to cut them off now. The top ones will work fine, but now I have a different issue, is how do I fasten it on the front? I might have to go to straps. However, because the firewall sits so flat to this, I can't run thick straps because they would get in the way. So I might have to run steel straps And if I did that, well, maybe I shouldn't bother running these angles, or maybe I run a hinge and a strap. I don't know. Now I got to think it out. But this is why you always test fit. Tack things, fit it, weld it, fit it. As you go along, just keep fitting. And it sucks. So I fixed my leak over here. As you can see, I just ground into it a little bit, and then I just re-welded the whole thing. As you can see, looks pretty nice. And no bubbles. I also ground down a bunch of areas that were kind of in the way when it was being fitted. So I'm just going along and making sure I get lots of soap on everything, looking for leaks. And as you may or may not have already noticed, I do have a new leak, which really sucks. I thought I was all good, but there was some weld here that I ground down for the lug, and I guess when I re-welded it here, for some reason this leak popped up. So all I can do is mark it and repair it. So I finally got my last leak sealed, which is awesome. So these would have worked fine for the top, but because I couldn't use a tab on the bottom, the best alternative is to just use a strap. A lot of people would argue as well with aluminum that you should use a strap anyway, because there's a much better chance of these tabs wanting to tear off the tank and cause a leak as opposed to with steel. Not really an issue in this case because of the fact that the firewall sits literally just about touching it, and then the seats are there, the frame here. Like, the tank really can't go anywhere in a wreck. But the straps are the better option. So I took some 1/16 by 1.5 aluminum, and it just started on this side and just did one bend, and then marked here, and then another bend, till I got to the bottom. And that'll work perfectly. Once I put it in the card next time, I'll mark my holes, drill them out, bolt them down. Usually on a tank strap you would have rubber. My clearance is a little tight, so what I'm going to do is probably just plasti dip the inside of this, maybe plasti dip or clear coat where it's going to hit the tank, and call it a day. And that'll work for my two straps. So I'm going to quickly do this other strap, and then I sanded this down with just the it's gone now, there we go, with this a DA. Just want to make sure everything was smooth, there was no nicks. I didn't want to be having to file it or do it afterwards. It's much easier to do now. So I've got my line right here showing where this is tucked underneath the frame. So I've just got to make sure I stay clear of that and evenly spaced here. I'll mark this out. The inside of this gets cut with just a hole saw, and then I'll trim it out with a zip disc. And then we can fit the sump or fit the surge tank, I should say. And then we'll mark all the holes, and then this is the top of the tank is 1/4 inch, so plenty thick for me to tap all those holes. And then I'll have to clean everything out, and then I can install it for good.
Eventually.
Hey, so one drill and a lot of smoke later, here we are. We got the whole cut. And I've test fit my Radium, it's called a fuel cell surge tank. This is the fuel level sender. I could wire it to the CD7 to my digital dash, however, I'd have to do it through the Infinity since there's no analog inputs on the CD7, so I'd have to use one of my analog inputs in the Infinity and then send that signal over CAN to the dash. Not only is that a lot of work, I don't really want to limit myself on my inputs on the Infinity for extra things I might want to add. So I'm just going to go ahead and just buy a fuel gauge and mount it down next to the EGT sensor gauge, and that'll show me my fuel level. So I'm going to pick up a gauge and test that tomorrow before I bolt that in. I've also got to make a cap. I've got a gasket. I got to make a cap to block off the fuel fill, because obviously I won't be filling from here. I'm going to be filling from here. And then let's have a look at this. So we've got one out, one return, and then one vent. And then all the wiring is on the outside already. And then this is my surge tank. So that's mounted, you know, well, it's sitting in the fuel itself, but it's pretty much the same thing as what you would have for an external surge tank. It's just now in the tank. So I actually have two pumps in here. You should only need one with pump gas, just on 93 or 94 or whatever I can get locally, and that's all I'm going to do for now. However, the turbo and the rest of my fuel system, the engine itself, well, I guess not the engine as it is now, but in the future it will be able to exceed what you would normally run on pump gas. And I don't really have any interest in running methanol. You know, then you get two fuel systems, you get twice the chance of a failure. For the amount I'd drive this car, I'd probably just, you know, buy ethanol. We don't have it on the pump. I would put it in a flex fuel sensor and just have the ability to run ethanol if I'm chasing numbers at the track, or I didn't want to limit myself. And for what it costs for the extra pump to buy it now and have it installed, it just makes sense. And then I'm redoing all my lines. I'll just do them all with PTFE. The only part of my system that won't be rated for ethanol are my ID2000s. I just upgrade those to ID2600s, and that would cover me for more than enough fuel. So I've got to mount my my hanger on here and my lift pump, and then the lift pump, I've got to take my measurements so that my sock is just touching the bottom. And yeah, that's kind of how that's all going to go. I guess it's like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'll make I'm going to change up my firewall here and make a panel removable. And then I can fully access this, and here's all the wiring. So I can wire up both pumps. Right now I'm just going to wire up the lift pump and the first pump. And should I, after the engine's built, down the road, a couple of years from now, the second pump is there if I need it. Also, if I have a pump failure, I'll just switch the wires over and I'll use the other pump. So that's not a problem either. The only other thing is the vent. I'm going to put the vent the same way I did the last one, which is through a charcoal filter, because I don't want the smell of gas in the garage, especially where I do welding. I don't need gas fumes in here. So the problem with that is that at least with my old tank, it didn't vent fast enough that I would get that I could fill without the trigger either going off or getting an air bubble come out and it spilt gas all down the side of the car. So the plan is I'm going to weld right here just a -6 bung, and I'm going to run a line up to just at the filler neck, and I'll run a little line there. So it won't be a vent, but it will vent to when the filler cap is open, so that when I'm filling, there's just a straight vent coming through, and that shouldn't get any air bubbles. But yeah, pretty fucking exciting. Thought this time would never come. I got the gasket down, all the holes are threaded, cleaned out the tank. Actually measured, takes about 70 liters, maybe 75, which is awesome. I use this PermaShield fuel resistant gasket dressing and sealant. It's the only one I could find that was good for ethanol. I'm not planning to run ethanol right away, or E85, but I'm setting everything up so that I can. So I've got my lift pump installed. That's a Walbro 450, or the 274, I think is the part number. And then there's two more of those in here. So this will feed into the sump. The sump will then feed the engine. So if there is fuel slosh, the engine will actually only be sucking from out of here, which will stay full at all times. So even if this hits an air pocket because I'm low on fuel and the fuel sloshes, there should still be enough fuel in here to get me through the corner until the fuel levels out again. So, and then this is the fuel sender. There are two pumps in here. I'll only need one for now. If later in the future I bump the power up and have to rebuild the motor and decide to put an E85, then I'd need the second pump. But it's already in there and wired, so I would just need to connect up pump number 3 over here, or pump number 2, I guess. You can fit 3 pumps in here, but I won't be going anywhere near that. And now all my holes go right through the top of the tank. So I'm also going to put this sealant on all the bolts. And this stuff is actually not like your typical silicone. It gums up real fast. It's almost more like a glue or a Loctite. So I think it'll be a good choice putting in all the bolt holes. And then all the bolt holes also have a nylon washer that goes on top. So it would seal anyway, but if I can get it to seal below the gasket with the sealant, then that's just a little extra insurance. Okay, so here it is installed. I got my 2 fuel lines in here. The only thing I haven't done is hook up my vent line, which needs to do a loop up, and then I'm going to put it through a charcoal filter. I've also got a extra vent line added on the other side. And the sole purpose of this line is just to aid in filling, so that I don't get any bubbles or any air pockets coming out, and because where I fill it right here, it would spill right down the sill, which it has in the past. And then if we go in the back, you can see the fuel lines go through the bulkhead. I'll try to get a good angle. There's my kind of ugly looking setup with my inline fuel filter that comes to a Y and then feeds both primary and secondary rails equally, and then they both feed into fuel pressure regulator and then my return line coming back. Now of course all of this is hidden by the upper intake manifold, so a little bit of a rat's nest, but it's all quite organized, and all the wiring has been since loomed, which was a big undertaking, but that's done now. So now I've got my oil lines are all finished. Not much exciting there. My fuel tank is finally done, and everything is installed, which was way more of an undertaking than I expected, but I'm glad it's done, and I feel it's done right. My shifter, I didn't really touch on that. It's just a K-tune shifter. Cables come back. Not a whole lot to say other than it is way better. Already I can feel it's way better than the factory setup, or the factory 5 setup I should say, but until I start driving with it and fine-tune the adjustments on it, I won't get into reviewing that. All my full function engineering, the fuel rails and stuff fit amazing. It's got ID injectors now, so it's ID 1050 primaries and ID 2000 secondaries. The only part of the fuel system that isn't ready for E85 is those ID 2000 secondaries. So I would upgrade those to the 2600s if I go down that path. But I don't think that's going to be anytime soon, and probably not until after the engine's rebuilt. And I'm not sure the tranny could handle that power. I just wanted to be prepared for it so the fuel system doesn't require anything other than 2 injectors for any power goals I should ever have with this engine. so I'm covered. So next up is a lot of finishing touches, and I'm going to do a transcooler and a pump. I'll get into that in the next video. And once that's installed, then I'm going to do some wiring. So I got to wire in the extra pump because I've got the lift pump now, and then I've got to wire in the second pump in the surge tank, and I've also got to wire in the pump for the transcooler, and I've got a fan now on my intercooler that I need to wire in. So I'm just kind of leaving all the wiring to last. And I'm also going to try to clean up a little bit of this mess. This is kind of the only ugly spot of the wiring in the car, which is hidden when the firewall's on, but I'm going to see what I can do to clean that up a little bit more. I also need to wire in my fuel level sender. I picked up a nice little odometer gauge to put next to my EGT gauge. But lots of little touches. The main thing right now is to get it up and running, to check for fuel leaks, check for oil leaks. I'm going to have to retune now with these injectors because I'll have accurate inputs for these injectors or flow rates, but I didn't for the factory ones. They were just the best guess off of the options that I had in the Infinity software. So some real tuning is going to start as soon as I get this thing up and running again, which hopefully will be soon. So until next time, thanks for watching. Peace.